Hello, this is Neo, just an average CSGO player, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Oh, hello, Scrilluminati. What's that? You've got some information for me. Virtus.pro has benched TaZ and will be using MICHU instead. Come on now, Scrilluminati. That sounds like unfounded speculation, which you should ask Virtus.pro's permission for before ever repeating in public. Oh, they've announced it unofficially now, and besides, that's not how journalism works. Okay. Do you have any more information for me? Esports Pools has fantasy contests, but don't pick TaZ anyway, because he's terrible. And... yeah, no, okay, I know not to pick TaZ, but come on, there's no need to kick a man when he's down. They also have betting, and they don't even own any esports teams, so you don't have to worry about the implications of any big upsets that might happen there. That's an incredibly edgy yet accurate statement there, Scrilluminati. Oh, Scrilluminati, you say the darndest things. Now, TaZ has been benched from Virtus.pro, and MICHU, with a player who's actually stood in for Virtus.pro in the past, will be standing in for the team at the Star Ladder Season 4 finals soon in Kiev, and IEM Katowice at the end of February, early March, obviously traditionally in Katowice, Poland, one of the classic events of Virtus.pro. Interestingly enough, in the official announcement by Virtus.pro, they did happen to mention that TaZ is allowed to negotiate with other teams, which does imply that even though he is benched, I mean, remember, they do still own his contract, it doesn't sound as though they're planning to necessarily bring him back. And then they also promise that while MICHU is not a permanent replacement or signing, well, first of all, they're giving him these 2 events, which sounds like a trial, if you ask me, to see how he does overall, but not have to commit to him long term. And also, they do say that they will have news about the team coming in future months, which makes it sound like TaZ isn't coming back almost regardless, and odds are that if not MICHU, it will be another player coming into the team. Now then, this is obviously information which DK, the best investigative journalist of the ones who are full-time pros in the scene, reported in terms of saying TaZ would be removed and that MICHU would be the player joining, which I have to say, so much for the Virtus.pro general manager, right, who denied it, called it an unfounded rumor. Now, of course, we're supposed to believe that coincidentally the same exact thing did in fact happen, and that somehow, while yes, you try to contact people for comment, that we're supposed to wait on Virtus.pro before anyone can do journalism. So, pathetic way to handle things, quite frankly. I understand why he's doing it, but you get called out when you do stupid things. Now, let's use my usual approach for how I do roster moves on this one, which for anyone who's not familiar is, we ask first of all, is this player the right player to remove from the team? Is he a problem in the team? And is the player being added a solution? Notice I don't say the solution. There probably isn't the solution in many scenarios, but is this a solution? So first and foremost, let's look at Virtus.pro as a team, and I really have to outline what they've done for the last 10 months. Because remember, obviously if I go 12 months back, we've got the E-League Major, where they were in the final, absolutely could have won that major, would have had their second major there. Then they had DreamHack Masters Las Vegas, where they were fucking amazing. They wrecked Astralis on the key maps that they won there, and they had a pretty good game against SK in the final, admittedly a brand new event for SK, first event with Phelps. So they won one massive event, could have won 2 massive events in a row to start the year. But beyond that, from March onwards, from Katowice onwards, their home event, this is what they've done in the last 10 months. And quite frankly, it is unacceptable because they've played at 12 LANs. Now, I'm not including the Adrenaline Cyber League, where it was a 4-team invitational, and some of the teams weren't that good. And like the only good one really was like Na'Vi, who were out of form. And then also, I'm not including E-League Clash for Cash because it was just an invitational show match. They lost it anyway. And so I don't really count those as LANs because they're going to skew numbers, like whether you made the playoffs, because obviously that doesn't make sense for those LANs. So of the 12 LANs they've played over the last 10 months, they've missed the playoffs 8 times, so 75% of the time they missed the playoffs. 3 of those were before the player break. They had IM 11 Katowice, which is the World Championship, which they were invited to. They lost to Na'Vi. Okay, Na'Vi was in decent form at the time. They lost to North. North was actually pretty good at the time. They beat Cloud9, but actually that was before the summer run of Cloud9. Cloud9 wasn't very good at this point in time. They beat SK Gaming. Okay, again, SK Gaming, like I said, had just added Phelps, and plus this map actually took place on Inferno, I think. think it was Inferno, when both teams barely played the map. So it was a bit of a wonky result. It was a 16-14 anyway, not really counting that much. And then they lost to Heroic, who was obviously an underdog team, and they lost to Heroic on Nuke, which is actually Virtus.pro's best map. So this was actually quite a dodgy result for them. The team that had won Vegas before and had made the final of the E-League Major, you would think they would get through this group. Yeah, it's a tough group, but they should have been getting through, and they were getting maps that were some of their best maps, so kind of underwhelming already. Then they went to Star Series Season 3 right afterwards in Kiev, and they lost here in the Swiss system. They lost to SK, same SK team. They lost to NIP. NIP was actually in terrible form at the time. And they lost to Fnatic, which was the reformed Fnatic with JW and Flusher back, but not a very good Fnatic. Like a decent team, but at the time they themselves didn't make many deep runs in playoffs and oftentimes would be very shaky even in group stages. Then we had later in the year ESL 1 Cologne, where it was a Swiss system and they lost to Immortals. Okay, Immortals was like on the rise somewhat, but still hadn't shown themselves to be world class, so still not that great if you want to be a top 5, top 6 team. They lost to SK again, but this was very good SK. They were in their prime in the summer, and they lost to Heroic, but actually this was when Heroic had their middle of the year lull, where they weren't actually very good compared to kind of Itze, where they kind of had their best ever run. Then they had 5 times after the player break. So don't think this was all just before the player break when I sold those stats and maybe because of Epicenter they picked it up. No, they had more tournaments after the player break where they didn't make the playoffs. They had DreamHack Malmo, the first tournament, where they lost to Na'Vi, who'd only just added Zeus and weren't that good themselves. And they lost to Renegades, who, yes, has shown themselves to be better and a decent team, but we're talking like top 10, borderline top 10, not an elite team. And they lost quite convincingly to both of those teams. Then they had ESL 1 New York, where they lost to FaZe. Okay, FaZe was beating everyone, that's fine. But then they lost a best of 3 to Team Liquid. Now, yes, this was a very good tournament for Team Liquid, arguably their best ever. Certainly they became a much better team. But again, Virtus.pro is just losing to everyone pretty much meaningful at this point in time. They had an E-League Premier in their group. They absolutely should have been able to get out of this group. They had Envious, they had NIP there. They lost to Envious, who, quite frankly, is not a very good LAN team. They did all right at this tournament, but not a great team overall. Not even a top 10 team. And then they lost a best of 3 to NIP. Now, yes, NIP was decent, but they weren't in any way in top form. The fact it's NIP, don't get fooled by the name. So losing a best of 3 to NIP, this just shows that you're not a top quality team. There was also the WESG Europe and CIS offline qualifier. Now, here's the key thing. This really shows how bad Virtus.pro could be with this lineup, because they got 0 map wins in their group stage and did not make the playoffs. And here's who they played in their group stage. They tied Team Russia, which was a mix of 3 different teams. Flipside, Gambit, Na'Vi. Yes, some good players, but a mixed team. This is a real Virtus.pro lineup playing against them. Then they lost to Belgium. Belgium, by the way, their lineup is Scream, Existence, and Who Gives a Fuck. That's literally who their lineup is. Not a good team in any context. Not even a good team in the context of this tournament, and they lost to them. They tied Envious, who had to use Kiyoshima as a stand-in because it's a nationalized tournament, and Scream was playing for Belgium. So without one of their, in theory, most skilled players, they actually tied Envious, and Envious is not a very good team on LAN. And then they tied Game Agents, who is a team from Hungary that most of you are not going to know almost any of the players from. So this just shows how bad VP could be, because they're going against mixed teams and tier 3 teams, and they're not even able to or teams that have stand-ins, and they're not even able to get map wins, and they have their real lineup at this LAN. Then there was the E-League Major Boston most recently, where obviously they were already qualified to the new Legends stage because of being Legends, because they'd finished top 4 at the last major. They lost to QB Fire. They had an amazing draw. That's the best possible draw you could have hoped for with the Swiss system in the first round. They lost to QBF. QBF, not particularly top team, quite frankly, didn't really beat any top teams when you look overall. They did all right in terms of some of the matches, like beat some sort of like bottom end of the top 10. Virtus.pro just got rocked by them completely. They got rocked by Fnatic, who admittedly is a solid team, but you should at least be able to play them close if you're at someone like Virtus.pro. You have players like Snacks, you have some pretty talented players. Bialy, Pasha, these are skilled players. Fnatic's more of a well-rounded team, more of a consistent team. And then they lost to Cloud9. Now, yes, Cloud9 did go on to win the tournament. Cloud9 obviously was in amazing form at this tournament overall, even though, yes, they were a little bit more dodgy in this Swiss system. But this is one of the reasons why this is key, because Virtus.pro, even at their worst, was still beating Cloud9 in the past. This is a team where they famously always did well against North American teams. So the fact that now they're losing against Team Liquid, they're losing against Cloud9, it shows you that every possible advantage of Virtus.pro seemingly had degraded or entirely just dissipated overall, because they didn't even have the intimidation factor. They could kind of get in the heads of NA teams or make NA teams feel like, oh, fuck, we're playing Legends, and get nervous. Now teams are playing against Virtus.pro, QBF, Cloud9. They're just thinking, fuck yeah, let's get a win over a big name, even though, yeah, they're not good now. Let's get a win over, let's get a big scalp, shall we, and upset these guys. And they're getting upset all day and all night. Now, if you think it's bad the times they didn't make the playoffs, just wait till you find out the 4 times they did make the playoffs, and you're going to see how underwhelming this team was. So at PGL Krakow, the second major of 2017, they made top 4. Now that sounds fucking amazing, top 4. But here's who they beat. So in the Swiss system, they beat Vega Squadron, not a good team at that time, not actually that good a team now, very streaky team, maybe a little bit of upset potential, but only against the right teams. They beat Vega Squadron, no big deal there. Probably shouldn't even been at the major, quite frankly. They beat Fnatic. But this was the Fnatic, remember, before they made these roster changes now, when they still had Olaf Meister and they still had Dennis. So that was a team that hadn't done a whole lot overall. Admittedly, they made top 8 here, so it's an okay result, I guess. A decent enough team, but not an elite team. And they beat Cloud9, who, yes, was in their hot summer form, so that's pretty good. Okay, I guess for this one, they managed to do it. That's actually a legit result. And then in the round of 8, the quarterfinals, they beat North, who admittedly is a team who has crumbled in a lot of playoffs over 2017, but still a solid team, a top 10 team, certainly. That's it. That's all they did to get top 4. So, I mean, I guess you can get a top 4 like that, but you didn't have to play SK, you didn't have to play Astralis, you didn't have to play the Gambit team that actually won the tournament. You know, overall, not that sick a result. An alright run, I guess. Placing certainly very good. They had ESG Tour Mykonos, where they were actually in the easier group, I would have said overall. They were in the group that had Team Liquid, who, this is the first event we actually found out they were going to be in good form, and they made all those player swaps. They had Big, who, yes, they'd had top 8 at the major, but I never thought was a good team, quite frankly. And they had Envious, who was actually in terrible form at the time and did terribly at this event. So making top 4 at, which is the playoffs, at Mykonos, not really that great a deal, quite frankly. Then they had Epicenter. Now, Epicenter was an amazing run. They lost to SK, but SK obviously won the tournament and was in amazing form, and it was their first tournament with Bolts. They beat Gambit, who'd actually looked pretty good at the tournaments before, especially during Malmo. They beat FaZe in a best of 3. These were all best of 3 results. FaZe obviously at the time was the best team in the world and was unstoppable. They beat them with classic VP style. They beat G2, who was very hot at this tournament in the semi-finals. And then they beat almost beat SK in the final in an amazing best of 5, where they did really play some fantastic Counter-Strike and narrowly lost to the best team in the world, probably currently, quite frankly. Then the other tournament they had was the Starladder Invitational Season 2, or number 2, which was just after the Epicenter tournament. Now the problem here is this tournament field was whack. The next best team after Virtus.pro was Renegades, and they lost a best-of-3 final to Renegades, and therefore didn't win a tournament, which was an absolute gimme, in theory, coming off after Epicenter. The teams that they beat otherwise, not top teams, teams that have, like, names, some of them, but had massively degraded over the 6 months before. So no, this wasn't a particularly good performance. So, consider this. They were invited to 9 of those 12 lands, because obviously 2 of them were majors. So there was only one tournament that wasn't, and obviously the other one was WESG, which they qualified for. So they were invited to 9 of those 12 lands, 2 majors, WESG were the 3 that they weren't invited to. On 6 of 8 occasions that they missed the playoffs at an event, it was an event they'd been invited to. So they're getting all these invites, and they're just fucking wasting them. They're blowing them. They're doing nothing with them. They're not making playoffs. They're getting invited again and again, though. Now consider how many lands last year. Go and look it up. G2, one of the world's best teams. Heroic, pretty solid upset underdog team. Gambit, pretty good middle-of-the-pack top 10 team. Think how many lands those teams did not qualify for, because they had to go through these really crazy, super tough, really strenuous online qualifiers. Meanwhile, Virtus.pro is just getting invited to all these lands, and they're bombing the majority of them. Then you've got to consider they wouldn't even have been at these lands if they'd have had to actually qualify, because they were fucking terrible online. They never made it to any of the EPL or ECS finals. In fact, because they were invited to so many lands over the year, basically the only big lands they didn't get invited to were IEM Sydney and IEM Oakland, which as far as we know, they might have been invited to, but they might have just turned the invitation down. So they just got invited to everything. Therefore, being trash online didn't matter. They never had to qualify. And when they actually were in a scenario where, first of all, as I said, they didn't play online qualifiers because they was getting invited. But when they did play online, they were utterly terrible. In ECS Season 3, they finished 9th. In EPL Season 5, they finished 13th. In ECS Season 4, they finished 7th. In ESEA Mountain Dew League, which is like the Tier 2 teams, they finished 4th. And they even lost to the WSVG Poland online qualifier final to Ago 2-0 in a best of 3. So they were utterly terrible online. Now, here's the thing. Online, they're doing really terribly. Online, they're utterly terrible. Now, I understand it makes business sense to invite Virtus.pro. They're a massive team. You always hope they can do something magical like they did in the past. You hope as well with their history, okay, cool, they can come out of slumps after a few months. My problem is this. After the major, after PGL Krakow, that's where all those reasons no longer matched up. They no longer did give you great performances online most of the time. They no longer did show you great play that made it worthwhile. They actually got rocked massively in loads of the games. They were getting beaten on not even getting like double digits, just getting rocked in every single best of 3 pretty much. And also, they no longer were a team that showed that they were going to come out of their slump. So actually, after the major, I think they had no business being invited to these tournaments anymore in any of these places, except maybe like a smaller one like Mykonos, etc. Definitely not ESL1 New York or Epicenter and these other big tournaments. And so actually, I think they have now become a good example of how, unless it's an event in Poland, I don't think these top organizations can justify inviting this team anymore. Admittedly, they've now changed the player, so we'll see what they do at this point in time. Now then, what were the problems in Virtus.pro? Right? So they had a lot of problems because the team was so bad. So the biggest problems for me were these 3 players, and in this order. Snacks, number 1. Neo, number 2. TaZ, number 3. Now, here's why. Snacks, he did a terrible job as an in-game leader. He looked like whatever he called didn't fit his players at all. If he indeed was giving Neo more of a starring role, he didn't know how to use Neo. He definitely didn't know how to use himself, and in doing so, weakened the star player of Virtus.pro, one of the best players in the world before he became the in-game leader, trashed his own game completely, and basically only Pasha and Bialy, sometimes straight carrying games, gave VP any chance at all in these matches. And as I say, the majority of the tournaments, like 3/4 of them, they weren't making playoffs. They were getting smashed by massive figures. They were just doing terribly, and they were wasting invites, quite frankly. So Snacks, on many levels, was a big problem in the team. Admittedly, though, you can take him away from being the in-game leader. He's still a very talented player, he's a very well-rounded player. So there's still a lot of faith you can have in Snacks. You're not going to cut him immediately. Now, Neo... Here's the problem. Neo, if he indeed did have more of a starring role, was given more freedom, then he did really fucking badly. And it was Snacks who said he did, by the way. Because if you look at some of his performances, he had a few lands that were good, mainly when the Virtus.pro had good performances. Other than that, he had some terrible performances last year. There was a span of time where he had 3 out of 4 lands where he couldn't even hit 0.5 FPR. Now, a good pro should normally be like 0.6 FPR to 0.7 FPR. That's like a good pro. Star players, higher, not high 0.7, 0.8. Some of them amazing players, godlike performances, 0.9 FPR. He was doing like 0.4, 0.3 FPR. These are about as bad as you'll ever get from a big name team at big lands. And that was DreamHack Malmo, one of the biggest events of the year. That was E-League Premier, also a massive event. That was ESL New York, an event with a bunch of really good teams at. So at the events that are stacked with good teams in E-League Premier, he didn't even have a hard group. He was playing like an absolute bum. I realize he's a legend. I know even in CSGO he's had times where he's been a pretty good player, brought a lot to a team. He was doing nothing for the team at this point in time. And just because he's CSGO royalty, I'm not going to let him off the hook for that reason. It doesn't matter if you're my favorite player. It doesn't matter if you're the best player of all time. You still get criticized if you play like absolute shit. Now, the other player who was a problem was TaZ, because TaZ was weak all year long. He wasn't an in-game leader most of the time, which means you can't necessarily give him a pass in that sense. Yes, he's not one of the primary elements of the team that the team's built around, but he just wasn't doing his job in terms of fragging. And as a result, it doesn't matter that he's got experience and that he can team play and that he's got a great attitude in some senses. It doesn't do anything for you. And one of the problems I want to add before we get to the players doing the swap here is that people always talked about Virtus.pro like, oh, this player needs to get it together, the in-game leader needs to get it together. They've had a coach the entire time, and it's a coach that knows most of them intimately for a long, long time, for many years. It's Cuban. So They already had coaching. They already had someone trying to help them figure things out. Or they had someone looking through the demos. Already had someone giving them tips on what to change up. This lineup just did not work and had absolutely run their course. So you know what? Did they need to make a roster move? Yes, absolutely. They must have made at least one roster move. I might even have gone drastic and made 2 roster moves if I were them. But I understand. Do it gradually. Bring one player in at a time. Fair enough. Because they had tried everything internally. As I said, they tried all the different roster swaps, role swaps. They tried swapping in-game leader. They tried having the coach help them with different things. They tried everything, and they've been to all the lands, and they were failing the majority of them. They had lost to such a variety of teams. Eventually, they were just losing to pretty much everyone in best of 3s. They were losing best of 1s by massive figures. They basically had no map pool except playing Nuke. Otherwise, they were suspect on any other map. Train, Cobble, all these maps that are classics for them. They could lose to anyone on these maps. Basically, only Nuke was their home map in that sense. Then you got to, which makes it easy to ban against them, by the way. They were god-awful online, so they're not even doing work for you online and getting to any of the offline finals. They were only at LANs, quite frankly, due to invites, so they were propped up by being seen and having exposure at these LAN tournaments, but they were doing jack shit at the majority of them, the vast majority of them. They had good runs, but quite frankly, when I broke them down there, you'll see their good runs were so rare that they're basically outliers to the rule. They're the exceptions to the rule that prove the rule that Virtus.pro was not a top team in 2017 and was not even a good team. Then consider that out of those runs, only 2 of them really matter, which is PGL Krakow and Epicenter. And of those 2, only Epicenter is actually a sick run that sees them beating other top teams and actually having a chance to really win the tournament. Then you got to add in another reason why they needed a roster move is there's talent out there in the Polish scene. I know I did a video where I said that, you know, what's happened to that talent. But then again, how can I blame that talent too much? They've never had a great in-game leader. They've never had great veterans playing with them. All the old Gold and 5 players just fucking retired or in Virtus.pro wasting away and wasting everyone's time and wasting invites rather than ever going and helping these fucking guys learn how to play and transfer some experience to them and be a rock for them and help set them up to be star players as they did in Virtus.pro with Snacks and Bialy when they came into the lineup or as they did with Pasha when he came into the lineup in 1.6. They've never had that benefit of having these guys around them, which I hope will be the case now. So, was TaZ the right guy to remove? Well, as I said, you're not really going to remove Snacks. He's still a star player, still got star player potential, plus take him off in-game leader. We know he can do some things. He's also so versatile. He can give you that opening threat. He's an amazing rifler, good clutcher. You just have to keep him in the lineup for now. Also, by the way, if you let Snacks go, he might go to the second best Polish team and fucking beat your ass a bunch of times. Now, I also think Neo, if I had to pick between Neo and TaZ, yeah, I might have kept Neo because he still had some clutch factor when he played well. He also has a much better history of being good in CSGO. TaZ was only really very good early in CSGO, and then he had a little spurt after the major ESL 1 Cologne last year when he had some amazing performances, but then he really fell off this year. Now, I will say, when you lose TaZ, you've got to have some concerns. You've got to have concerns that we're going to lose some team play. This guy's played with a bunch of our players forever. We're going to lose an in-game leader option. I thought one of the better in-game leaders. I know a lot of their best results came with Neo, but I much preferred having TaZ there to swap between sometimes. And then you're obviously going to lose some of your drive because he is a guy who gets very fired up, gets his team fired up, and really does have that warrior spirit, as I made the point of in my article recently. And in that sense, I do think he was to some degree the heart of Virtus.pro. He was the spirit in that sense. So I do worry a little bit that they're going to lose some of that fire to come back in matches and push through and have that ballsy, crazy style, which I do think came from TaZ in some sense. But I do have to say, with him being so poor last year, team play doesn't mean a whole lot if you can't get any frags yourself. I actually think also in terms of the spirit and the drive, etc., I think the problem in these teams, and this is a problem they used to have in 1.6, quite frankly, is when they were doing badly, then that motivation from TaZ, I think they tuned him out a bit. I don't think he was like a Ray Lewis who they all believed in, or Kevin Garnett who like fired them all up. I think when they were losing, they got a bit annoyed and they would kind of tune him out a little bit, or they'd just think, ah, whatever, and just play however they wanted to play anyway. So I don't think they're going to lose as much in the short term because they weren't a top team anymore in that sense. Now, was MICHU the right player to add? Okay, so let's go through who MICHU is. So this is a guy who, in early CSGO, was playing with Snacks and Bialy in GF Gaming. Then he's played for pretty much all the big-name Polish teams. I mean, a lot of these were basically the same core going to different teams, but he's played with them all. Meet Your Makers, ESC, G2, Lounge Gaming, Kingwin most recently. Now, he's also played with Virtus.pro before. He's played a number of online tournaments, but he's played a bunch of LANs. He played at the Game Show LAN, which is a CIS LAN in late 2014, where he's replacing Neo. He's replaced Snacks twice. He played at Gfinity Spring Masters 1, where Virtus.pro, I think, finished third. I think they beat Cloud9 in the third place game there. He's replacing Snacks, obviously the star player. And then he also played at the end of 2015 at IM10 San Jose, where he replaced Snacks. And obviously that's the one where they lost in embarrassing fashion to Team Liquid, who had Mo standing in. Now, he did decently at those tournaments he played for Virtus.pro, minus San Jose, where he did terribly, but then everyone did terribly, and they were replacing their star player. But he certainly wasn't a revelation when he played for any of these Virtus.pro lineups and didn't like blow the doors off a mix and you've got to get this guy into the lineup. Then again, though, I will say, I don't think it's that fair necessarily to judge him entirely on those particular performances. Because first of all, he's replacing different players. Sometimes he's replacing Snacks, who's the star player. I also think it was somewhat expected he would be picked up when you consider not just his history with Snacks and Bialy from a long time ago, but this history with Virtus.pro of having already played in the team. He also was one of the best Polish players outside of Virtus.pro. Now let's look at his styles and strengths. So I have to say, one thing that worries me a bit about MICHU is he's a very up and down player against all tiers of opposition. Against tier 1, against tier 2, even against tier 3. He can be absolutely insane and take over the whole game and be the star player. He can also be very average, give up loads of deaths, and not get many kills. Now, if you actually go and watch the games that he's played, and you watch his POVs, and you watch the big matches he's played in, I have to say, one thing that's really interesting about this guy is he reminds me of a poor man's Bialy, especially Bialy when he first came into the lineup and was playing in 2014 and 2015, because he's at his best when he's pushing onto sites, when he's one of the entry guys, when he has an AK in his hand. He has some really streaky, but really nice AK aim. And when it hits, it's really deadly. And he's that guy that can do those 2 bullets into this guy's head, 3 bullets in this guy's head, spin around and do 1 into this guy's head. So he reminds me of a young Bialy in that sense, that streakiness, but also that crazy first couple of AK bullets. I will say, he's got really nice first couple of bullets with an AK. He's got pretty nice burst with an AK or an M4A4, but he does... Because he's such an aggressive player and he likes to take duels and fights, if he misses the first burst or the first couple of bullets, he does way too often go into full auto spray, which is kind of janky and doesn't really work as well for him. I think he's a player who would actually be a lot better if he just did like 4 to 5 bullet bursts and then reset, moved, and then did it again. I think he'd actually get a lot more kills and he'd be kind of more surgical in how he played. Now, he's a very aggressive CT player. Not in terms of like initial pushes, but he always peeks the angle. He never plays an off angle. He's always peeking in to check for information, check for if there's a fight there. And if he sees a fight, he's going to take it. Now, he's also someone as CT who's moving around all the time. He's never just holding an angle, holding a spot. He's moving position all the time, trying to find position. He's playing around smokes all the time. He's pushing through smokes all the time. If he sees a smoke, especially a smoke from the terrorists, he takes that as an invitation to push through almost every time, it feels like. And so he's someone where actually I think he's a bit predictable in that sense. If the other team doesn't know that and he catches them off guard, it's going to be amazing. He's going to get kills. He's someone where whenever he has info as CT, he's always pushing. He's always trying to use that info to cut off a rotation, to get into position, to advance the fight. He's never like using it like, oh, I've got some info there, I'm going to pull back, I'm going to let them come in, I'm going to have the surprise advantage. He wants to take the fight. He's someone as a result who's flashing himself in or getting flashed in to take every fight he can find. He's re-peeking into fights he's already seen and already killed people at, which actually, again, can be a bit predictable. The fact he's so horny for fights means he is that guy who peeks out, kills one, gets a flash in, either dies there or kills another, but he's just going to keep going and he's going to get killed eventually. And as a result, he gets a lot of kills, but he also gets a lot of deaths. He doesn't survive many rounds all in all. He's a guy where on the T side, he is an entry player, sometimes pure entry. Sometimes you'll send him first because he's got that great single bullet AK aim. Also, he can just be a semi or a follow-up play, but he's always going to be part of the entry pack. And generally, his team's played around letting him enter a certain part of the site as others enter, and him being like often a distraction player or the first person leading you into the site. He's a guy who loves to hunt for kills after the bomb's been planted if he's a terrorist, and really wants to find those fights, find those players, and take battles with them. He's always active on the map on both sides. He's a guy, as a result, though, who can push unnecessarily. Like, he's a guy where you could be in like a 3-on-2 on Dust 2. You might have taken a site, but he'll see a smoke go down and he'll hunt through for the other CTs, whereas he could use the numbers advantage and his amazing aim and just stay in the site and probably win the other round. So he sometimes will throw rounds away, but then again, especially for these lesser teams, he was also winning you a lot of rounds as well. And generally that like unnecessary hunting or over horniness to go for fights, that's the problem he has on both sides. And it does play to his strengths at times. That's also why he reminds me of Bialy, but he does give up a lot of unnecessary deaths as a result. That I think is part of the reason why he was so streaky, because then when his aim wasn't going and his game or he's playing elite level competition who eat that kind of play style up, I think that actually got punished a lot for it. And he didn't really seem to over the years change that up or learn from it at all. He just stuck with that style, which again, this is one of the reasons why I want to see someone like this play with a TaZ or a Neo, or people who can give him that veteran edge and tell him, no, don't do some of that. Yeah, use this aspect of your strength, use your aggressive feelings, Padawan in this particular sense. So I think that is one area that maybe can kind of be beaten out of him and maybe he can improve upon. Now, I do think overall, in terms of skill, he was probably the best player to bring in, because I think one thing that Virtus.pro needs is fragging power, quite frankly. Their only players overall in 2017 I thought were good was Bialy had some really good fragging, and Pasha was pretty good in terms of impact play and fragging overall. So I do think they needed more fragging in the lineup overall. So I think bringing him in, yes, he's got some of that. He's an aggressive player. You know, Virtus.pro likes those aggressive plays. They like those trick plays through smokes, those plays where 2 or 3 you hit the site aggressively after you've thrown the initial smokes. I think he's going to be good in that sense. Maybe they can kind of beat out of him some of the unnecessary kind of selfish or greedy plays he sometimes attempts that I think just aren't, they're kind of ill-informed or ill-thought out overall. So maybe that can happen. Now, there were other options. I actually thought a couple of other options they could have gone with, because as I said, MICHU's been so streaky and hasn't really blown the doors off when he's got his chances, is I thought you could have given a chance to someone like Spero. This is a guy where he's a primary AWPer. It would give Virtus.pro a consistent AWP threat, and then you could have Neo or TaZ, Neo or Snacks be the secondary AWPer, depending on the map or the side. I think that would have been an interesting approach to take. I think I also might have considered going for Mouse, who actually, yes, has a name spelt the same way as the nickname of the Mouse Sports team. He's a guy who is a pretty consistent player. Actually, when I've seen him play against international competition, he tends to be one of the players who does better out of the Polish players. Not as up and down, more of a rifle player. So if you want to go with the 5 rifles like Virtus.pro successfully ran for the last couple of years, I think that would also work. But okay, I get why you give MICHU a chance. He's got the past history with the team. He is a very skilled player, probably the most skilled player outside of Virtus.pro. So okay, fair enough. Now, in terms of TaZ, he's already said that changes are needed in life, and I'm looking forward to challenges ahead of me. This is not the last time you will hear from me. I have never had problems with motivation, and I can tell you now I am happier and more motivated than ever. Now, that is something that is very encouraging for me, not least because I really hate it when players like Fiflaren, or in this case, maybe a Neo or a TaZ, or Shroud or nothing, when they get kicked from the top team or leave, they just straight retire. They're just, I'm done. I want these guys to go to the next best team in Sweden, or the tier 2 teams in Sweden or Poland or North America, and go there and teach these guys and bring some veteran leadership to them and tell them what Snacks and Bialy do and what makes them so good, and show them how you set up a star player like them to have their most effective success, and tell them some of the things you learned from big matches, and therefore bring the next generation up. But sadly, a lot of these players don't, because first of all, they get to hang on for so long in those top teams. Therefore, they don't want to go to a lesser salary and think, oh, I've already played long enough as it is, I'll just quit if I can't be on a top team. So that's also why I actually am in favour of kicking some of these players early, quite frankly. So I actually really hope that this motivation means, my hope would actually be that he goes to another Polish team. Either he goes and he plays with Kingwin, or he goes and he plays with Pride or a Go. He goes and plays with these guys, and he brings some leadership to them, and he brings an in-game leading style, and he shows them how to develop their style, and he shows the star players how to play and maximize their strengths, but minimize some of their weaknesses, and he shows some of the supportive players how to set up star players, something he can do himself, and has always boasted that he can do, and quite frankly, I believe he can do it. I think he was a key reason why Snacks and Bialy suddenly were so good in Virtus.pro. So I think he is something of an underrated in-game leader. I think he's a very good motivator in some senses, especially for young players who haven't heard it for years and years. And is in his own way, especially if he goes down level, he's a big game player. He can give you big performances from, in theory, your weakest position, your weakest spot on the map. Now, he does have to improve his level a lot if he wants to play for a top team again. Like, if he wants to go abroad, this guy can definitely speak English. He's got a great personality. He's very charismatic. He's a really cool teammate in his own way. He is serious when he's in the game. He doesn't fuck around like some of his teammates have in the past, or give up top, etc. I'd also love to see this guy go to an international team. It's just that if he does that, his level's going to have to be a lot better. If he's going to go to an Optic or a Mouse Sports or some NA team, he's got to bring his level up. But I'm glad that he's not done at this point in time. I hope this isn't just a statement he's saying in the heat of the moment, and he will end up being done. I think he could bring a lot to a lot of other teams, and he could still contribute a lot, not just to Counter-Strike, but to Polish Counter-Strike. He could bring up some of the next superstars so that we don't have to just hope for Virtus.pro to turn it all around with MICHU. Otherwise, we have to write Poland off as a CS country. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, TGreb, Jake Petrucci, Yordan Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to get exclusive teasers for my upcoming work? Submit questions for me or make suggestions for my content? Become a part of the ever-growing Scrilluminati via Patreon link in the description box below.